I guess I mean, I thought about this before when I noticed that question. So for me, when carrying out knowledge equity work, these factors include like inclusivity, so ensuring that there's a diverse range of voices and perspectives are included in, whether it's creation, dissemination, application of knowledge. And that involves actively seeking out and incorporating input from peoples from those diverse and underrepresented groups. I'd say accessibility in making knowledge easily accessible and readable to marginalised groups, negatively racialised peoples, depending on their backgrounds, their abilities and, resources. Cultural sensitivity is another important one. So being aware of cultural differences and striving to create, content and practices that are respectful and inclusive of various, cultural perspectives. I'd say representation.
When people write policies about how people are going to be governed, it's fundamental that the people that are going to be governed by that policy, that their voice is running through that. Now, that's not to say that they get to dictate what that policy says, but it enables the people who are writing them policies to understand how it feels to be on the other ending of them policies. And it goes back to that power struggle. How many times do you hear that when people rise up, they think that a policy is unfair because they've not had a say in it. They've not had a chance to say, well, actually, this is how it feels to be on the other end of that. And there's so many times that people in power have made them policies without even knowing. And the people that they consult are higher level civil servants, probably not been on the other end of it. Oxford, Cambridge, all these kind of places, like that's the same like-minded people, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what we do to feel safe. We don't want people to argue against our ideas, if possible. Some of us encourage it, like an open challenge, but 9 times out of 10, you want your ideas to stay. I do, like everyone does. So, I think that's the real importance of it. And also, I think it's about giving agency to people that feel like they have none. And I think in this world, if you can make someone feel like they belong to something, or they are worthy, or they're just being treated like a human being, I think that outweighs anything else. I think that allow people to feel like that, because when you are dehumanized, or you feel like you're voiceless, or you don't feel like a human being, I know what that feels like, and that's not a nice feeling. But I also know what it feels like to be given that type of stuff as well. And I know which way I would prefer to feel. So I wouldn't want to portray that onto other people. So just on a human level, on an everyday human level, without any big policies being changed, without anything being changed, the way that we've been doing it just doesn't work. And that's because you've not asked the people.
Yeah.
And look what happens when you do. So look what happens with AA meetings and Narcotics Anonymous. A lot of people that run them groups now are people that are ex-addicts, and they've got really good results.
Yeah.
So it's like there's always like just a level. Yeah, you can get to that point, but actually you can't come into government and advise us what it's like to live on a council estate, or what it's like to be on licence when you get out with nowhere to live. There's like glass kind of ceiling kind of effect where you can see what the issue is. You can see that if you can get through to it, you can help with that issue. But actually, this country is very good at keeping people in their place. And I think what knowledge equity does, it helps to break that down.
We've tried to do in our former projects, primarily with disabled young people, is about creating kind of spaces of equitable theory building. Yeah. So we would say, so it's not just about including lived knowledge or lived experience, it's about a recognition or an acknowledgement that forms of lived and embodied knowledge fundamentally change the way we think or look at something. So like when in our Living Life to the Fullest project, we were working with younger people living with shorter lives or lifespans, that when we come to talk about post-humanist theory or critical disability studies theory or fragility, life, death, etc., there's something, and we would say we were again like radically building theory with and co-authoring with disabled young people living shorter lives. Yeah. when you're actually living a life that's shorter, there's some, and again, it's really hard, and maybe that's another point, is that there isn't quite language to describe what that is and means. There's something fundamentally, and I don't want to denigrate it by saying raw or real, or like, there's something fundamentally illuminating, I guess, about bringing that knowledge to the table to think about theory with and for others.
Yeah, like just not having to follow the same rigid conventions of this is the best place for an interview to take place. You know, thinking more about, I think as well, for like for people who may have limited attention spans, having a space that is not just devoid of distractions, if that makes sense. I think having a space where if they wanted to fidget, if they wanted their attention to wander, they can do, and that's fine. And we're not sitting in a room that's just like white walls, very clinical, you know, like the traditional kind of corporate spaces. I think having somewhere where they can feel more relaxed, if that makes sense, and it doesn't have to be these clinical spaces, which I think sometimes research encourages us to do. I think if we have more authentic spaces that are similar to real life, the more comfortable people are going to feel to be open. So working with the young people, I think they had a perception of me as a teacher to start with, or an educational professional, or a research professional. And so the start of the interview was really breaking down that conception and showing that I wasn't here to evaluate them. I wasn't here to test them. I was here to hear what their experiences were. And even though straight from the beginning I shared a little bit about me, I shared a little bit about my personal experience, my family, the fact that all of my siblings are also dyslexic as well, and sharing that where my passion came from the interview. I shared with them as well that I think their voices, I shared with them, I was like, I think the best way for us to make change in policy or understand what's going on is to directly speak to people who are experiencing it at the moment. And I think you guys have the best insight into what it's like today at school, being neurodiverse, dyslexic. So I said that at the beginning, but then I don't think that was enough to just blurt that out right at the beginning. So I continually throughout our conversation dropped in anecdotes from me, especially if they said something that spoke to an experience I had when I was at school. So I would affirm that during the interview, or if they were struggling to think of an example, then I was more than happy to share examples from my life or from my siblings' lives, or other friends that I knew that were dyslexic. And I think that did really help. And I had a student at the end that said to me, because at the end I was like, thank you so much for talking to me. I appreciate it's really weird talking to someone you've only just met about these personal things, you know, confidence, maybe negative experiences of school. And a couple of students said, oh, it really helped that you shared too. So it was a two-way conversation. So I wasn't there to just extract their really vulnerable moments of life.